OMG. The MMT charlatans are at it
Let me
again.
know, and that would be very helpful. Our close tomorrow, but tomorrow we will be seeing the core PCE drop, and that's a big one. It's important for the Fed as well, and then we'll have Powell speaking tomorrow. So yeah, I did our weekly update for applied MMT earlier today, and it's really just been steady as she goes. I almost want something to come up that can change, kind of change.
MMT, if you're not aware, is basically they're in favor of deficit spending and inflation. That is increasing the money supply. They're inflationists.
Well, we're having David Andelfato on the podcast tomorrow, which I'm looking forward to. I think I tweeted maybe a few weeks back now. Who would you like to see on the podcast? And a few people actually suggested David. For those of you that aren't familiar with him, he previously worked at the Fed, and he's now a professor at University of Miami, I believe, the business school. And he's MMT friendly. I think he has disagreements with MMT. So eager to talk to him, see where he disagrees with MMT. There's actually an article that I think we're going to go through later in the stream. It's a conversation between David and Eric Timoin, who's an MMTer. Does a lot of great work on the kind of like the more technical accounting side. Where they discuss kind of their differences between what he calls standard monetary theory and MMT. So excited for that tomorrow, and yeah, maybe we'll go through it later tonight if there's an interest in doing that.
Yeah, I'm interested in doing it. So
Cool.
we'll give it a shot. Anyone watching on Twitter, man, if you can drop a line in chat, I'm curious if anything's showing up. It's saying we've got 40 viewers on Twitter, so God only knows what sort of shenanigans are played with numbers on Twitter in terms of inflating numbers. But all right, where do we want to turn now? What I want to do. So earlier yesterday, not earlier this week, yesterday. Actually, before we do that, let me do this. Actually, I'm gonna switch back to chat here. What do we got? We had a really good question here from Connor in terms of what caused the slowdown, and I'm noticing it's not actually coming up on stream. I apologize about that, but I'll fix that as we talk this through. The question was, last week I talked about the flows, the credit cycle, and what caused it to top in late 2021 and ultimately bring the down run into 2022. Very good question, very astute question. There is just an underlying dynamic at play where the credit cycle is just cyclical. It booms and busts by its very own nature, and it's constantly cycling up and down, up and down, up and down. There were a few things that occur at that time as well to make it such kind of a devastating event, at least in the equity space. But the main cause of the credit cycle stopping is the fact that it needs to continue to accelerate over time. That is the most important thing to kind of think through, or the most important aspect to understand, is that it always needs to continue to accelerate. So what I mean by that is not just increase its velocity, but actually increase its velocity each time step at a faster rate, right? So it needs to continue to accelerate, and once that acceleration falls off, and it's a how do I put this? It's impossible for something to continue to accelerate into infinity, right? So there's a natural boundary that we don't know, but I mean it's just part of the overall cyclicality and dynamics of the system. But eventually, it will run out, and it's, I don't know, peak to trough. Entire cycle might be about 4 years, give or take, and obviously there are a ton of variables that can offset that. Yeah, but velocity would be the right way to put that, or acceleration. I mean, whatever whatever, however you want to define it. I think what I'm trying to define is the second derivative needs to continue to increase. Yeah, if it's not accelerating, if it's not growing, it will eventually roll over and shrink. Yeah, I mean that's really what it boils down to, Django Geek, and so it will contract and collapse, and it does so kind of on its own weight. Steve Keen, speaking of which, I've been on a huge Steve Keen kick as of late, and Steve Keen is the guy that I got this all from. So between him, Ty Keen's, those are the two sources that you want to go check out. Speaking of Steve Keen, take me a little off track here. I'm going to be on the Steve Keen and Friends show this Sunday, so make sure and check that out, and hopefully I can pick Steve Keen's brain in real time and get some of that going. But it'll be a great discussion. Yeah, the Minsky software is great to look at, and Steve Keen does a great job kind of demonstrating the endogenous cycle. Now, one of the interesting things about this endogenous cycle, I think I pointed this out during the last stream, maybe it was 2 weeks ago now. But one of the interesting things is there was generally speaking, how I think this happens is I think the Fed raises interest rates, okay, and I think the Fed raises interest rates, and I think it's the raise of the interest rates that actually kicks off the cycle, the endogenous bank credit creation cycle. And the reason I think this is a couple of things, but above all else, it's that additional interest income to the private sector, and it's particularly kind of that direct capital injection to banks as well. One, via their bond holding, just getting more interest, and then two.
So what? This is some sort of perverse, like pro bank credit expansion cycle theory.
Now is interest on reserves. There's this kind of push into it goes directly into the capital structure, kind of recapitalize banks. Essentially, what it does is it allows the banks to kind of start to take on more risk, right? So I mean, if you understand the Minsky psychological or kind of the psychology of the Minsky cycle, you go from very conservative to less conservative and
What the hell is this clown talking about?
creation to risky to it's kind of this Ponzi style expansion. And what kicks off that movement is this higher interest rate, and more importantly, the extra income to the private sector. This extra income does two things. One, it's just income, and that's like the most important thing for banks to determine loans. They look at your income, whether it's revenue for a business or it's an individual for income. That's their determining factor. Do you got the money to pay it back? It's not reserves. It's not anything like that. It's income, and then it's their capital structure. And so, higher interest rates or just government spending in general,
Or collateral.
kind of buffets that entire cycle, and it kicks the cycle off. And what you'll notice is that in 2020, when we had the massive government stimulus, right, that is really what kicked off the credit cycle, on top of the fact that everyone had to just be pulling on their credit lines at that point as well. But you had this massive credit cycle kickoff, and it lasted about 2 years. And that seems to be 18 months, 2 years. That seems to be the natural cycle. You have government contraction in terms of spending in April, and then you just get a very bearish outcome come 2022. So I think that's the reason. That was a really good question, Connor, and I hope that answered it. Adam, I don't know if you have any other thoughts. If you do, while you do, I'm going to try and fix the overlay here. So fire away, man.
Yeah, I would say Riddick's thinking, and I believe Riddick is in the Twitter chat. Actually, I saw him. Riddick's thinking on this I found to be very informative because I hadn't really heard anyone frame it the way Riddick had. So if you have not listened to our conversation with Riddick, highly recommend that. And also check out Riddick's Substack and Twitter. It's RP Goyle. He's in the Twitter chat if you're on Twitter.
Nice. Yeah, his video was. I had always kind of thought that I naively just kind of bit the line that there still would be this hesitation from banks in a higher interest rate environment to create loans. But I knew about the interest income. I kind of understood the MMT side of it, but right. I wasn't bold enough to really to go with my instinct that maybe even banks like higher interest rates from a standpoint of a willingness to extend credit because
Right.
of it. And Riddick really he set me straight on that one, and I'm forever indebted to.
Yeah, so these guys have it all wrong. Bank credit expansion, when not backed by real consumer savings, is the cause of the business cycle. What happens is the artificial credit expansion um, brought about by the central bank monopoly on banknotes, the cartelization of the banking system, leads to malinvestment in capital goods industries, and eventually the malinvestments are realized to be uneconomic and liquidated. The whole process is bad. It's a waste of time and resources, and it's unnecessary if we simply return to a gold standard, if we abolished the institution of central banking once and for all, had a stable monetary supply and a system of free banking, as well as the separation of the warehousing function of banking with investment banking, then we would have a much stronger economic system, and it would this whole return to the gold standard would encourage individuals to save their income, because instead of inflation, you would see healthy and steady deflation, probably around 2 to 5% per annum. So people would have more incentive just to save their income instead of consuming it, and that would lead to a greater supply of loanable funds for entrepreneurs, and we would see probably the sort of optimal interest rates of 3 to 5% that were enjoyed by the Dutch during their heyday, the English during their heyday, and America during their heyday. The sort of idyllic rate of interest, one could say, um, of about 3 to 5%, which is caused by widespread consumer savings and just a large amount of loanable funds that entrepreneurs can tap into. But this whole idea of creating the money of thin air and then lending it out, that's bad, because, well, first of all, there's no free lunch. Okay, you don't get something from nothing. So when the banks are creating money out of thin air and lending it out, what they're really doing, well, let's go one step further or backwards. Let's say that I operated a printing press in my garage. I printed fractional reserve notes that were indistinguishable from the real thing, and I went out and spent them. Let's say I printed $10,000 a month, and I spent $10,000 a month buying stuff, going to restaurants, etc. Well, clearly I've gained $10,000 a month in income, in goods and services rendered to me. So where did that $10,000 a month come from? It didn't come from nowhere. It didn't come from out of thin air. There wasn't an extra $10,000 worth of goods and services produced um, because I created this money, but rather I took that money from anybody who was holding cash. I siphoned a tiny amount of the value of their dollars and spent it. So that's the same thing banks do when they create money out of thin air and then lend it to businesses. They're actually taking that value from everybody who holds cash and lending it out without their knowledge or consent through counterfeiting. Just as if I were to counterfeit money and spend it, I would be stealing a tiny amount off anybody who had cash in a bank account or cash in their wallet or any other money. Then, um, so yeah, basically we need to return to the gold standard, and we need to separate the functions of banking, this warehousing of funds, as well as the investment banking, and we need a 100% reserve standard so that banks can only lend out funds that they have. Like if they have gold, then they can lend out that gold or a note that is redeemable for that gold.
To Riddick on that. All right, we're gonna see if we can get this rolling real quick. All right, what's next? I am seeing some chat show up on Twitter. Nice. Riddick, thanks for popping in chat over there. Ty as well. Thanks for jumping in chat. Riddick saying, Doug, not seeing your question here, but streamer explain. Okay. Yeah, I'm fixing the question thing. Adam, do you have any other thoughts while I maybe get this question thing taken care of one last time here?
Let me think. Well, I'm excited for the Steve Keenan Friends. Does Ty run Steve Keenan Friends?
I don't know. Ty. I don't know if Ty is still the guy that's behind the scenes. Maybe he can jump in. Yeah, should be a good conversation.
Yeah, that'll be great.
Applied MMT, so I guess these guys are like they're using MMT to guide their investments, something like that.
7-8 years, something like that. And I actually own 2 of Steve Keenan's books, but I have not read them yet, and I haven't watched much of his stuff on YouTube either. So eager to dive into that side of things for sure.
Nice. All right, we got the overlay working again, so we're good to go. It's game time. Time to shit on Pear. All right. I mean that in the most loving way. I would expect nothing less from him coming my way. And honestly, chat guys, here's the truth of the matter. I had to chat GPT a little bit of. It's been a while since I've done philosophy. Let's just put it that way. I think it's been 20 years since I had a philosophy class. Maybe a little bit less. And Pear was talking philosophy here, and maybe you guys can try and help me understand, because this is something I don't think
He's talking methodology here. I guess everything can be considered philosophy in the sense that it's about knowledge.
Ever got into this when I was an Austrian in terms of what do they call that, like human action or something, where they really get into the deep philosophy of how you build economics. And Pear's tweet, economic laws.
Basically, the idea is that economics is a subset of praxeology, the science of human action, and that economics is not really an empirical science. It's not an a posteriori science, but rather an a priori science. So you start with a fundamental axiom that man acts, or you could say that man acts purposefully. It's the same thing. And then you use the rules of logic to deduce economic laws from that.
Are not derived from empirical data. They help us understand empirical data. And I thought, I thought I understood what he was getting at. And and he confirmed that in the comments or the replies. No, economic laws are a priori truths. Natural science laws are empirical statistical approximations. And again, what I had to make sure that I was understanding him correctly. That I mean, essentially, what he's saying is that economics is just first and foremost an a priori kind of like math equation that you gotta crack it first, and then
The reason why economics is an a priori science is because the ultimate given is human action. People are actors. You can't break that down any further. For many decades now, economists have treated economics as an a posteriori or empirical science. And this is a fundamentally flawed approach because there's so many confounding factors that without a solid theory to guide you, you're just not going to be productive with your time. You're going to end up chasing ghosts in the data and
then you
wasting
can
your time.
interpret any empirical data. And in all honesty, I haven't thought that deeply about this. And again, Chad, you guys can inform me on your thoughts. But that seems bonkers. And maybe if you are an Austrian in here, maybe you can help me understand this. But what role does empirical observations or empirical evidence play? And when would you know that you are wrong? Would it? I mean, is the only way that I could prove the Austrian foundation wrong by bringing a syllogism to play here? I don't know, Adam.
So, the role of an Austrian economist is to interpret the empirical data in accordance with economic laws to explain what's happening. Austrian economics is falsifiable, but you would have to either disprove the action axiom, disprove the logical rules which deduce following rules, or disprove the deduced rules. It's not really falsifiable empirically, just like you can't falsify 2 plus 2 equals 4, no matter how many times you come up with 2 plus 2 equals 5. It's not going to actually disprove the fact that 2 plus 2 equals 4. It just shows your methodology is incorrect.
Thoughts on this, but I
I'm not super well versed in the Austrian side. I just get, there's a bad taste in my mouth whenever I see what these guys are writing because it seems so quasi-religious and not, unwilling to question kind of the core tenets of Austrian economics. So I'm kind of confused by this point that he's making. I would love to hear from an Austrian if we do have any in the chat.
I actually do think I'm going to have to Adam is too generous. Adam's a good guy, man. Yeah, I'll have to reach out to Bob because obviously it was easy to take a punch at Pear here because I think that's the thing is I think that's the thing is I am so driven by the evidence and maybe to a fault, right? And I just don't see how if I'm I don't know if I'm calling for something to occur for 30, 40 years, right? And it just is never going my way. How long can I really say that everyone else is just wrong, right? And eventually I'll be proven right. I don't know. But he continued to double down on this whole idea. I think I got in his head a little bit because he said this part doesn't matter so much. but it sets the context. If you read a book that popularizes an idea that jives with you, and you have then you have certainly acquired more knowledge about the subject matter than any other person who had studied it in detail. So it's only right, nay, duty to be arrogant and condescending about it. Am I condescending? And then don't let that get to you, pair. I usually don't. It's quite saddening, however, that there are so many people who suffer so badly from Dunning-Kruger and aren't wise enough to put a sock in it. And I think that was a direct shot towards me. So I got a good kick out of that.
This is Twitter at its best, isn't it?
It really is. I was very excited. I've been trying to get my voice back, been under the weather this week, and trying to get to sleep at a decent time. And I tweet that out, and I'm like waiting for my dopamine rush to see what comes back, because it was God, I'm addicted to Twitter.
Are he and Bob friendly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
On this point, I think your economics has to be empirical. Maybe I'm wrong in this, but it just seems like there has to be kind of a pragmatic empirical approach to economics. Otherwise, I don't get. And maybe that's especially maybe from an Austrian standpoint. This would just follow. But you can never make a policy then if there's nothing to test, right? It just you would never. I mean, maybe they would say you could make a policy, but it just seems like even from an economist standpoint, you'd want to take an empirical approach. The other question I would have too is, directly to an Austrian is, okay, so we're building these deep learning models, we're building these various tools that seem to be demonstrating an ability to truly learn from the data, right? And they're built on an empirical approach, right? We're baking in certain empirical observations to these models, and these models are able to learn based on that. If it was pure, kind of mathematic a priori, you just set the rhetoric and logic and let it go. How could you, like, what do you say then to a kind of a worldview or a set of tools that are consistently predictable? Like what, and it does. I mean, Adam, like you were just saying,
Your models are sophistry and do not correspond with reality.
I mean, it feels kind of like the whole Galileo, Copernicus situation, where the empiricists are coming around with observations that clearly contradict the rhetorical assumptions being made,
right?
Undermining those, what gives at that point, I guess. So,
well, let's discuss the specifics. What observations have you made which undermine the economic laws deduced by Mises et al.?
I don't know.
Yeah, I would be curious to know, because to me, it does seem like this pair guy is very hostile to MMT. I know Bob Murphy is less hostile, and he's open to conversations. You guys have had conversations, and he seems like willing to accept that he was wrong about certain things. I don't know. It does seem to me that Austrians are always just predicting this inevitable crash and blah blah blah, and I don't know what it would take to get.
So this criticism is just off base. I mean, yes, it's probably true that Austrians have predicted 15 out of the last 3 recessions, but it's just Austrians don't pride themselves on being good market predictors. That's not a measure of the usefulness or the truthfulness of Austrian economics. Murray Rothbard considered himself to be like the worst economic predictor. The the point of Austrian economics, of praxeology, is to explain things that happened, not to predict the future. So, um, like, yeah, we're not good at predicting the future. That's very difficult. But that's just not a cogent criticism of Austrian economics. That's not something that we think we're good at.
To question their priors, but it seems like that's what they're all about is their priors. So
the
I don't know.
the unquestionable priors. All right, those are my thoughts on the pair. Byland, is that how you say his last name? Yeah. Incident. I really just I'm an empiricist at core, I guess, at least when it comes to economics. Doug, read the Mason Gaffney paper. It explains why Austrians are that way.
But it's not like Austrians are anti-empirical. Like all of the Rothbardian framework um, was observed through economic history, and I mean Rothbard was the foremost expert on uh, American economic history. He wrote Conceived of Liberty, History of Banking in the United States prior to World War II. You know, like 18th, 19th century banking history. I don't think anybody knew more about it than he did, and that's where like all this theory is derived from is observations in economic history. You know, it's not like it's just and Mises too. I mean, it's not like this stuff was just made up. You know, they observed what happened and observed these economic laws in effect. And I mean, I don't know anything about these two guys, but I do not think that they have the same sort of like scholarly. Maybe I'm wrong. Background, attitude. Like these guys do not strike me as individuals that, and I'm not either, you know, but as individuals that have spent their lifetime devoted to the research, like Rothbard and Mises were. I mean, they were, uh, you know, almost from birth, just like studying, you know, history and economics, and so the reason why economics has to be an a priori science, why it's part of the science of human action, is you need economic theory to guide your observations. You have to know where to look. If you just look at the data without any theory to guide you and just infer wildly from that, you're going to come up with all sorts of crazy and nonsensical conclusions. And you're just going to waste your time uh, chasing your tail, which is kind of the point. It's kind of the goal in that, like, modern day economists aren't really searching for truth. They're trying to rationalize government policy. That's the primary goal of most economists. They just want to, they're partisans and they're hacks and they just want to, they're basically um, neo mercantilists. That's what the mercantilists did. They rationalized the economic policies of the sovereign, whatever it was. The sovereign gave a grant of monopoly privilege to the East India Company or some other company, and the mercantilists were like, yeah, this is a great idea, you know. That's what side their bread was buttered on, and that's what modern economists do today. They're servants of the power elite. They're megaphones for politicians and bureaucrats and central bankers.
I'll give it a read, man. I'll give it a well. I will see if Mason Gaffney has anything on YouTube that summarizes it, and I'll give it a listen. if not, then I'll shove whatever I need to in Chat GPT to
So
summarize. But
I just Googled Mason Gaffney. I've never heard the
okay,
name before.
okay,
He's a Georgist economist. So this is interesting because I've actually taught. So I live in New York, and there's it's called the Henry George School of Social Science. And obviously, they teach Georgist economics. And some of their members have been asking questions about MMT. So I've taught 2 classes there actually now on MMT with a friend of ours named Jim. Yeah, what is the paper? Doug, do you know that what
what the paper
what
name
Chad
was?
is referring to?
No, he never dropped the name of the paper. Zero shot. If you can drop that, if you can drop the name of the paper, we'll look it up. Django Geek Murphy is pretty open-minded for an Austrian. He is. I've always appreciated his willingness to be open-minded, and yeah, I feel like there's a potential convert down the line with Bob Murphy. Gavin, this is a good point here. I think that the commodity-based money view derived from the philosophical hypothesis that human nature are entirely self-interested. Yeah, I know that's kind of part of their. It's been so long since I've been in that space. I'll have to.
I mean, commodity money arose organically, simply as a means of escaping the double coincidence of wants.
Let's do this. Let's change gears. And also, I just got some shout outs. Derek saying hi in the chat. Thanks for dropping in. I appreciate it. If I missed you in chat and you want a shout out, just say hi. Aurora Nora, been a while, man. Thanks for dropping in. We're going to do this. We're going to pull up the discussion of David Andolfata. Is that how you say his name?
Yes, I believe so.
We're going to pull up that discussion, and we're going to go ahead and go over this. We're going to try something new, just in general, kind of engage in some sort of content here. Set the stage, Adam. We have him on our podcast tomorrow.
Yes,
we have him on our podcast tomorrow, and he specifically laid out this is like a reasonable critique that he's offered of kind of MMT, and thought it'd be fun to kind of break this down. Adam, is there a spot you want me to jump directly to?
Yeah, I would just preface it, and so this is a conversation between him and Eric Timoin, who I feel like is a lesser known MMT academic. I think he's at a school in Oregon, but he is. I always enjoyed the stuff that he writes. He is extremely. He gets extremely technical and into the weeds of like the accounting and the operations, which I find helpful. So this is just a back and forth that he and Andolfado had. There's not a particular point. I think we can probably just take it from the top if you want, Doug.
All right. So David starts off. Eric, let's start off with an opening paragraph. One of the main contributions of MMT has been to explain why monetarily sovereign governments have flexible policy space. Not only can they issue their own currency, et cetera, but also are imposed. But also any self-imposed constraints on budgetary operations can be easily bypassed. I'm curious to know what the contribution is here relative to standard monetary theory, that the government can also issue its own currency, that there's this degree of flexibility is already accounted for. As for self-imposed constraints on budgetary operations, SMT takes several approaches to this depending on the purpose of analysis One approach is to take these constraints as given and then study their implications, but it's also common to consolidate the central bank, treasury, and government into a single authority, which implies no self-imposed constraints on budgetary operations. Perhaps this is what is meant by MMT, perhaps what is meant is that MMT shows how existing self-imposed constraints on budgetary operations can be bypassed in reality. All right, Eric saying yes, consolidation is not unique to MMT, as we have said repeatedly. Not only is it used quite commonly in the economic literature, but also it's a common rhetorical tool in economic discourse, etc. Right. So everyone understands this. At least.
But just because, I mean, this is just a convoluted way of saying they can run deficits. But just because they can run deficits doesn't mean they should. Government spending is a bad thing entirely. So why is it bad? It's bad because it requires taxes. So that is wealth taken by the state from individuals who create it to be spent on other purposes. But instead of this wealth being directed towards what consumers want, it's directed towards what politicians and bureaucrats want. So in the market economy, people have to produce useful things, stuff that people want and stuff that people urgently want, like food, shelter, clothing, things that are just vital to your day-to-day existence. But in the political realm, that's not the case. They don't direct, like the vast majority of spending is not directed towards food or shelter or clothing. A tiny amount is, like welfare would be that. I guess in a broader sense, the salaries of bureaucrats do go to those things, but a lot of it's spent on things that are very questionable, like military spending. That doesn't directly go to benefit anybody. You could argue there are substantial indirect benefits. A lot of people would. I would disagree with them. So every dollar that the government spends is another dollar that wasn't spent somewhere else. Obviously, we don't know where it would have been spent. Well, this is what Bastiat refers to as seeing the unseen. So, if the government creates an orphanage, you see the benefit right there. You know, these poor orphans, they have a place to live. It's a great thing. But you don't see the factory that would have been created, that would have employed people, that would have produced more material wealth, that also would have been a good thing. So in a economy with finite resources, there is always going to be a trade off between what is produced and what could have been produced. And I'm not saying we don't need orphanages, if they're even a thing anymore. Simply pointing out that there's no free lunch. That government spending comes at a significant cost, potential cost, or cost to the economy. And the vast majority of government spending isn't on things that directly help needy people, though they might like it. You'd think that, but instead is on the salaries of high-paid bureaucrats, the pensions, the salaries of politicians, foreign aid overseas, or spending on organizations of world government or proto world government like the United Nations, the IMF, all these grand organizations, global organizations, or the regulatory regime, which makes it difficult for small businesses to operate. And when you have government spending that's not financed by taxes, but financed by borrowing from the banking system, then you have inflation. And inflation is very bad because it it has a number of negative side effects. It encourages consumption and debt as opposed to thrift and savings. It transfers wealth from creditors to debtors which doesn't sound so bad until you realize that banks generally only lend money to people who have a lot of money, who have assets that can back it up, and that the people who are in the most debt are big corporations, are the government, and ultra rich individuals like Donald Trump. They often owe billions of dollars because they have billions of dollars in assets to back it up. And inflation is ultimately responsible for the credit cycle, for the boom bust business cycle, where credit expansion, artificial credit expansion, created out of thin air, leads to malinvestment in capital goods industries, and of course, eventually the money's paid back with taxes, which are wealth destroying and redistributive.
At least they should. It's perfectly consistent with standard monetary
So,
theory
Doug,
so
I
far.
just want to pause there.
Yeah.
For anyone that might not be as in the weeds in MMT, what they're talking about here is MMT basically just considers the Treasury, so the U.S. Treasury and the Fed, as the government, right? That's what they're talking about when they say consolidated view of government finance. And they recognize that they're separate entities, but they work together to conduct fiscal and monetary policy. That's what Tamoyan's referring to when he says consolidated view.
Perfect. So Eric continues on that most economists, politicians, and public don't understand the implications of this. They will interpret that the above saying is obvious the government create money, but it's not a normal way to proceed in its inflationary. MMT just pushes consolidation to its logical conclusion and shows that institutional details do back those conclusions. In a consolidated framework, the federal government can only implement spending by creating money. This is not abnormal, and it is not inflationary by itself.
Why can't they just tax and then spend? That would be non-inflationary government spending. Also, they say that taxes destroy currency, which is not true. The taxes collect the currency and then the government spends it. If they destroyed the currency after collecting it, that would be true, but they don't, of course.
If there's no other way to find the necessary dollars to spend, here's the consolidation. Yeah, that's a good point. For the federal government, taxes destroy the currency, and claims on non-federal sector falls. An alternative offsetting operation as the net worth of the government rises. When the U.S. spends, it credits accounts. Similarly, bond issuance does not lead to a gain of any assets for the government. All it does is replace non-interest earning government liabilities with an interest earning government liability. David coming back, I'm not going to argue against your accounting. As for bond issuance and standard monetary theory, an open market operation is modeled as a swap of zero interest reserves for interest-bearing treasuries. The interest on treasuries explained by their relative illiquidity. The economic consequence of such a swap depends on a host of factors, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Okay, this is definitely a place where I think we want to set for a second. Do you have any